Good afternoon and welcome to the Catholic University of America. My name is Father Mark Morozowich. I serve as the chair and director of the Ukrainian Church Studies Center here at Catholic University. It is an important evening that we gather together to raise our voices, to engage in conversation, to reflect upon the situation of the suffering people of Ukraine in the midst of an unjust war. This evening, we're privileged to have some wonderful guests with us. We have our very own Provost, Aaron Dominguez, who will be joining us for a panel discussion. Our guest of honor, His Grace Metropolitan Archbishop Borys Gudziak, and our own President Peter Kilpatrick. And it's a testimony to the seriousness with which our university takes this issue that we have our leadership here, and we're thankful for all of you for gathering here and being with us, and especially for all who have gathered as well remotely as we're live streaming this. So without further ado, I will now turn to our President Peter Kilpatrick to introduce and say a few words about our guest of honor. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Father Mark. Well, I'm very pleased and honored to welcome all of you to this event tonight, and especially to welcome our university trustee and my very good friend, Metropolitan Archbishop Borys Gudziak, who will deliver the lecture tonight on the cost of war and peace, necessary concessions, or the defeat of truth. I've gotten to know His Grace Archbishop Gudziak over the last 3 years, and I have always found him to be creative, really always seeking to solve the most important challenges facing not only the nation of Ukraine, but the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in America, that he plays such an important role in. The education of his students and people from the Ukraine, and how Ukraine will go on, hopefully when the war it comes to a just and lasting peace. We're now 3.5 years into a horrific war, unilaterally perpetrated by the genocidal war criminal Vladimir Putin. As with many forces of evil in the world, Mr. Putin has no compunction about dissimulating and lying and excuse-making and outright coercion. As with most bullies, he does not understand logic or argument or moral accountability or responsibility. He only responds to power and confrontation. And the West believes he's despicable enough to resort to nuclear weapons. But we cannot and must not make that an excuse to not confront him in a way to end the war. As Catholics, we're called to speak the truth with charity. Without truth, there can be no charity, and vice versa. And the truth of this conflict is that it was perpetrated for annihilating the sovereign nation of Ukraine. So we must be willing to speak out and to speak that truth with charity, or we won't have a lasting peace. And I think, the powers that be, as time continues to go on, are beginning to understand that. And I really can't think of a better person steeped in the history of the nation of Ukraine, steeped in the building up of the people of Ukraine. I can't think of a better person to really help us think through how do we go forward from here than Archbishop Gudziak. So again, I am just very pleased and honored to welcome my good friend Archbishop Gudziak to deliver this lecture. Your Grace?
Dear President Kilpatrick, dear Provost, Father Mark, dear friends, I hope that we can have ample time for discussion and questions and answers, because I think for most of you, the subject at hand is not a new subject. And there is not a particular need to speak about generalities, but it will be good to get into the problems at hand. Problems that face Ukraine, problems that face the United States, and the whole democratic world, at least, with an effect actually quite globally. What I will share with you is conditioned by my last trip to Ukraine, which was for 4 weeks. I traveled throughout much of the country. I was within 20 miles of the Russian border in Kharkiv, where there was, there's 4 to 6 bomb alerts a day. I was in Odessa, drove through many towns and villages, and it's conditioned by that, but I've been privileged to be in many discussions and many panels, and I'll share the wisdom of other observers and analysts. Let me just go through some of these slides to kind of bring us into the subject. Ukraine is a rich land. It produces enough food to feed 400 million people. It is the greatest producer of sunflower oil. And you saw those sunflowers, but you see what the fields look like very often. So much of the land actually is covered by mines, and so much of the land is polluted by toxic chemicals and heavy metals from all the armaments. This is the occupied territory, and it is important to remember that in the last 1,000 days, which is more than 3 years, the Russians have occupied only 1% of Ukrainian territory. What we see marked in the dark colors is about 20%. But in the last 3 years, having expended 1 million soldiers, injured or killed, the Russians have occupied only 1% of Ukrainian territory. This idea that Ukraine is about to collapse, that there's an imminent Russian victory, is just not substantiated by what has been happening over the last 3 years. This is the last days. This is what happened in the night from Saturday to Sunday in Kyiv, when also a Ukrainian Greek Catholic community was hit. The casualty count is still being assembled, but close to 100 people were injured. Many were killed. And this is day in and day out. A civilian area, civilian infrastructures, homes, shopping centers, hospitals, maternity wards, schools. Over 600 churches have been damaged or destroyed. In the city of Kharkiv, 12,000 buildings have been damaged or destroyed. This is the most recent statement, just fresh off the press, of the All Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, which unifies all the religious groups, includes Muslims and Jews, and it's really quite striking to see in the context of Gaza, of Hamas, of what is happening now in the Holy Land, seeing Muslims and Jews together. The son of the head rabbi of Ukraine sacrificed his life for Ukrainian independence. Ukraine has a Jew as president. There is so much challenging stereotypes or expectations in this solidarity that is being manifested in Ukraine. Here I am in Kharkiv in front of a building where the day after President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska, a family of 5 was obliterated. This apartment building had 100 apartments. All of them were evacuated. I was there basically 48 hours after the event. It was hours before the meeting here in Washington of President Trump and the European leaders. And 2 parents, father, mother, 2 children, and a visiting grandmother were killed. 7 drones hit this building, and 100 families have lost their homes. Kind of a day in the life of Ukraine. Here you see more of that site. You can move forward. Like the sunflowers that are entire fields, so too are the cemeteries. This is the Kharkiv cemetery with 2,000 fresh graves, fresh in these 3 years of soldiers. Soldiers of all kinds of backgrounds, Ukrainian writing on the graves, but also Russian writing. I saw the grave of a Dutch soldier at that cemetery, young and old, mostly men, but also women. This was one of the most powerful experiences in these 4 weeks, the cemetery visits and the conversations with the people at the cemetery. This is already in Poltava. And the blonde woman to the left of the priest in white is a mother of the soldier in that grave. She's the head of the committee of mothers and family members of the war heroes of this cemetery. And it was amazing to hear how positive she is and how they're working together to deal with their grief, deal with their irreparable loss, and to hold up the spirit of this inner community, which witnesses to the entire country. Another grave way across the country in Lviv, the 4 Basileviches, mother and 3 daughters. Maybe some of you met Mr. Yaroslav Basilevich when he came to Washington earlier this year. His wife and 3 children were killed. She was there present on September 1st last year, at the beginning of the academic year, when I had a liturgy for the students. On September 4th, they were killed. And on September 4th this year, we had a series of memorials at the university, at the site where their building was destroyed, and at the cemetery. That is their grave site. Here you can see heroic veterans, these veterans who have amputations. There's at least 60,000 amputees in Ukraine. Ukrainian Catholic University is conducting a leadership program for veterans. A good number of them want to go into civic political service, and they're real leaders on the battlefield, but now they want to learn how to be leaders in peaceful society. And it's really inspiring to talk to them. They're energetic. They've endured great losses, but they're looking forward. I was privileged 2 weeks ago to lead a panel of 4 POWs, 4 prisoners of war who had spent an average of 2 years in Russian captivity, enduring untold torture. The word of one was, you can't imagine how inventive the Russians are in inflicting pain on all parts of the body, electric shock, beatings, hunger, food deprivation. This is the mayor of Kherson, who in April 2022 was abducted because he refused to become a mayor collaborator. He actually had finished being mayor a year earlier when the Russians captured Kherson They wanted him to become their mayor. He refused. He was abducted. In June of 23, he was put on a list of POW exchangees, but he took himself off that list to make room for a critically injured soldier, which meant that he spent 2.5 more years in captivity. And there you could see before, could you go back? These are the before and after shots. What he looked like before captivity and what he looked like on August 24th this year when he was released. Here's another picture of a POW before and after captivity. You can just skin and bones, somebody coming out of Auschwitz in the 21st century. This is a war, this is a strategy, this is an approach that is blessed by the Russian Orthodox Church. It's called the Holy War. It's called the Metaphysical War. And this is the cost of this war. The graves, the tortured bodies, the post-traumatic shock that is being inflicted upon millions of people. This is the panel. This is me embracing him. Amazing people. And all 4 speakers in this panel, and this you can look it up on YouTube and see this panel with, it was during the Yes conference. If you look up Yes and the Prisoner of War panel, just amazing people, radiating positivity. They are not vanquished. And they were unbroken in captivity, and they remain so. So there is great hope. Catholics in the world are celebrating a special Jubilee year of hope. And I can tell you that my 4 weeks in Ukraine, I don't know if I mentioned that this was my 14th trip to Ukraine since January 2022. I never had that much contact with death, with cemeteries. I was asked to preside at the funeral of Andriy Paruby, the Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament, who was assassinated as he was walking to the gym for a workout at the end of August. I was in Lviv when it happened, and you're encountered with great tragedy, with viciousness, with cowardliness, getting shot 8 times from behind by an agent assassin whose own son died as a volunteer soldier for Ukrainian liberty, but his father became an agent. His estranged father became an agent, a killer agent. And at the same time, at the funeral, and then 9 days after the death, in a quiet encounter at the cemetery at Andriy Paruby's grave with his wife in conversation, she tells me, I forgive the assassin. I forgive him. And the first time we spoke was the day after the death. The assassin had not yet been caught, and she says to me, Father, don't you think I should be praying for him because they might kill him too? Which is the pattern in Russian and Soviet assassinations of Ukrainian national leaders throughout the 20th century. Something like what happened with Lee Harvey Oswald. Just cover the trace. So it was weeks of grief, of speaking with the family members, of touching the body of the man assassinated, praying with thousands of people on such an occasion, participating in the funerals, and yet it was 4 weeks of incredible inspiration. Because in Ukraine today, the Bible comes alive. The Bible, with all of its stories, all of its truth, the fall of man, the desire to live the gift, but also the temptation to live the grab and how that temptation leads to death. And an inspired people going to a promised land, not leaving its own territory, but fighting for it, defending their God-given dignity, freedom, democracy, religious pluralism, the right to their self-determination. I would like to, just for the beginning of our conversation, point out that Russia is not winning this war. Russia and Putin had set certain objectives, which they are not reaching. Weakening NATO. NATO is stronger than ever with two neutral countries that join members, doubling the exposure of Russia to NATO borders. Weakening the European Union. The European Union is becoming more and more consolidated, and European member countries have now pledged and are delivering on the pledge to spend not 2%, but 5% of their GDP on defense. In the first 3 days, it became clear that Ukraine is not going to collapse. That was goal number one, and he lost immediately. These cemeteries, and I could really feel it. I could feel it with the family members. They will be an indelible and unsurmountable message for centuries. This country is being unified by the sacrifice of its diverse population for one goal: for freedom, sovereignty, territorial integrity, democracy, for values. These cemeteries are not mute. When you go, you hear the flutter of those blue and yellow flags. And you see them en masse in a city like Kharkiv, which is a city of 2 million. That was cemetery 18. One where there's a particular concentration of these graves. But there's many more cemeteries in this city. And as you drive from Kharkiv to Poltava, from Poltava to Kyiv, from Kyiv to Odessa, from Odessa to Lviv, you pass through towns and villages, and you see cemeteries, and then you see the section where there's a blue and yellow flag at each grave. They will be speaking always. There's a pantheon being created of people who have made the biggest sacrifice for a common goal. It is cementing the national identity and purpose of a people who will not drop their resistance. I wrote to a mutual friend of ours, Sonia Soltus, who used to work for Coca-Cola, vice president. Many of you know her. And I asked her, Sonia, this summer, I asked her, how is it? And she said, well, we go to sleep and we don't know. She's an American, moved to Kyiv a year ago. We don't know whether we'll get up in the morning. We go to sleep not knowing whether we'll be alive tomorrow. But there's a pulse. There's a purpose. It's much better living here in Kyiv than to just peacefully going to Costco in the U.S. because there's this struggle for freedom. Ukrainians will fight to the last man. And I feel like I'm making some kind of contribution to this. And it's exhilarating. Exhilarating not in a frivolous way, not with effervescence, but with deep, deep conviction and a deep sense of what is authentic, what is true, what is meaningful, and what answers the questions of life and death. Ukraine will need radical changes. Because the question of peace ultimately is a question of victory. It needs to be clear to the global community and to policymakers that Putin has an obsession with Ukraine. He wants nothing other than the obliteration of Ukraine as a nation. Maybe it's not a plan to kill every Ukrainian in a complete genocide, but the genocide definition is that if you want to obliterate the national identity, that is genocide. He's uncompromising on this. He's been saying this for years. He keeps repeating it, and he keeps saying that basically the existence of the Ukrainian nation is the root cause of this war. And we have to unroot that cause. So Ukrainians have no choice to resist. And I propose that the global community, particularly Europe, also has no choice. Because the fall of Ukraine will be a great blow to what is the European Union. The future of the European Union is not guaranteed. There's all kinds of, in history, all kinds of configurations, all kinds of political arrangements that had a beginning but also an end. And if the European Union cannot emerge out of its complacency and realize that it is facing a deathly danger, it will not be able to stay together. The international world order, global order, which has allowed for American prosperity, which has been created by American leadership, will not survive a Russian victory in Ukraine. That victory is possible, but it is not predetermined. And it is important to understand what the costs of this war are and what the costs of the peace are. The costs we've seen. The peace cannot be bought or achieved at a cost that would undermine the duration of that peace. We can get into more detailed argumentation, but I will end with saying that Germans today are finally saying what emerges out of their own history. The German capacity to reform, to repent, to acknowledge the Holocaust, to step back from German imperial ambition was possible only because of German unconditional surrender. And what is necessary is Russia's unconditional surrender. If I had said this in Washington 2 weeks ago, people would say, you're not dealing with the realities. Well, whether it's only in words or whether it's in fact, we have the leader of the free world, President Trump, saying Ukrainians can fight back and win all their territory. If Ukrainians do that, that will lead to a Russian loss of this war on all counts. Russia has lost more than 1 million soldiers. The Russian economy is debilitated. President Trump has been speaking about this. There will come a time when economic factors will lead to the end of this war. Usually they do. But the economic power that leads to this kind of results has to be translated into political will and military power. And this is where Europe has to make a stand. I hope that the United States will continue to reconsider the cost of the war and the cost of the peace. because it has affected all of us. Going back to 2022, we can all remember the jump in our gas and food prices caused by Russian aggression. In 2022, the hit that Ukrainian agriculture took affected the tables of people in the Middle East, pushed the border of hunger and starvation further into the danger zone in North Africa. Today we see that this country with a mediocre economy, with a decimated population, is putting up an incredible fight, changing the rules of war. The ingenuity, the conviction, the sense of expediency, we have no other choice, we have to do this, is felt throughout the country. Is there fatigue? Yes. Are the costs of this war unspeakable? They are. But the ultimate questions are today posed in Ukraine, and I think Ukraine is also offering ultimate answers. And that is something that I welcome to discuss with you this evening.
Thank you so much, Your Grace, for this enlightening and stimulating presentation of the reality of the situation on the ground. We will now have a chance for our panelists to engage with His Grace and go back and forth in some conversation, and then we'll have a chance for everyone to join in as well.
So, the cost of war is clear. The cost of peace could be legislated on the battlefield with the drones and the missiles and continued loss of life. But I think you hinted in your remarks that the battle for peace will almost certainly have an economic dimension to it. And we have heard that the Russian economy is, I think you used the word debilitated. I would say perhaps it's close to collapse if the Europeans and the United States and our allies would simply show discipline in saying we're going to cut off this last major source of revenue to Russia, which is the gas and oil income. How can that happen? How close are we to making that happen?
There might be people in this audience who can answer that question better than I, who have a sense of Washington decision-making. But I would say that it is possible, and it requires decisiveness. It requires clarity and vision, and just some good calculation. So there are policy decisions, there's rhetoric that is expressed, there's gestures that are made that move things forward, or, let's say, increase the price, increase the cost. And I think, it seems, there's more and more clarity emerging, and that's why meeting like this is important, because the problem is not just what is in Putin's head. The models of what exists and what can't be changed have been placed in the heads, in the schools, in the Slavic departments, in the textbooks of Western societies. There's an idea that there's this big Russian bear. You can't bug him, you can't provoke him, and that bear is going to be there forever. And there's not a clear understanding that, for example, one, Russia is the last of the European empires. in its European empire, like many empires, that woefully and shamefully was in one or another way supported by the Christian society, by the church. Today, all churches look back on colonialism and say, wherever we played a part in this, we repent. Wherever we did not speak out against the violation of other people's God-given human dignity, we were wrong. Today, you still have the Moscow Patriarchate being the most important formulator of Russian ideology, the Russian world idea, which says everywhere where we were, this is our territory, this is our sphere of influence, and we've got to recover it. The Russian world idea is a formulation of Patriarch Kirill and some of his close collaborators, and it was taken over by Putin. So the church offered ideological justification for this kind of aggression, and it continues to offer it, and does so in an unrepentant way. The idea that Russia must lord it over 100 different ethnic groups, as it still does across the 11 time zones of its territory, forever, is false. Now, can Russia endure for years? That's very possible. Could it endure still for decades? As it is, that is also possible. But every one of these empires, English, French, the colonies of Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, the Scandinavian countries, all of these colonies were released not out of a gesture of magnanimity by the colonial powers, but they put up a fight. A smaller country put up a fight. In most cases, it was long, and that's why I don't expect things to end soon here. But in the end, whether it's for the economic reasons or for the reasons, moral reasons, or demographic reasons, the big power said, this is unsustainable. It's not bringing us what we want, it's costing us too much, and we give up.
And we repent.
Oh, and then we repent. The repentance really comes quickly when there's unconditional surrender, like in the case of Germany or Japan. Today we see, the king in the Bahamas or elsewhere, I don't know, on some of the islands he visits, being confronted with the colonial legacy. And, it's all complex as life is, but today, no African American will go back to slavery. Today, Algeria will not become a colony of France. And it should be clear to the world that no Ukrainian community is going to accept Russian sovereignty. It's over. Ukrainians have made a decision. Those graves are the most potent expression of that will and that intention. And that is something that the complacent Europeans who still want to do business as usual, and other countries, sooner or later, I think need to accept. Otherwise, there will be much more costly catastrophes.
Let me give you just a brief another view of the impacts of this war from the scientific fields.
You want to try mine?
So I'm an experimental high energy physicist. So I do high energy physics based at the CERN laboratory in Geneva, Switzerland. And basically spent my whole career back and forth between there and the U.S. And first moved there in the 1990s, the early 90s, with my young wife, and visited one of her childhood friends in Yugoslavia shortly after their wars had finished, and saw firsthand. We drove our Volkswagen from Geneva to Rijeka, which is in the Istra Peninsula, and drove through these villages, which had been, here's one house that was the Serbs' house, and then the rest of the block were Croats, and the houses were just gone, and the people were gone. And it was, it was really, truly brother killing brother in a just brutal, face-to-face kind of thing. And I, as an American, had never seen anything like that. Fast forward to a few years ago, I was at a physics conference in Crimea, high energy physics conference in Crimea, when it was still Ukraine. And it was just several weeks later that Russia illegally annexed Crimea and made it part of Russia. The conference was filled with Russians and Ukrainian scientists and Turks and Greeks and Americans and Iranians, and these are like traditional enemies working together towards a common cause, which was this joint project of international science based at CERN. And it's a beautiful thing to see people from these different types of backgrounds and countries working together on a common cause, which is just trying to understand the truth of God's creation. But then that country was gone, and it became annexed by Russia. And something happened at CERN over the course of this war that nobody thought would happen. And Putin he asked all of the rectors of the universities in Russia to sign a pledge approving of the war. And if you didn't, I don't know what would happen to you, but 100% of all the rectors of the Russian universities signed this pledge. 700. And so rector is another translation of the position either I or Peter have. So this is the top leadership class of Russia education, and they're all signing in the name of their universities support for this genocidal war. The CERN is a European international research organization formed just after World War II in order to do peaceful nuclear research, and was formed out of the ashes of the terrible wars that led up to the end of World War II. And Russia was long a part of the CERN experience from the 1940s until just recently, and we all basically banded together and kicked the Russians out of CERN, which I never thought would ever happen. Russia has now been banished from international high energy physics, and that's just going to be devastating for maybe forever. I don't know that Russia could come back from that. They don't have the resources to build their own accelerators anymore. Those smart people who were Russians are, basically pariahs now. And it's just the terrible cost of the loss of I guess something that maybe you all don't see because you're not high energy physicists, that this type of war has an impact on everything, Like the basic search for how the universe is put together has been interrupted because of this genocide.
So I just looked up the chief exports of Russia on my iPhone while Aaron was telling that fascinating anecdote about Russia abandoning its science, and the top 6 or 7 key exports are all petroleum-based exports or energy-based exports. So fuel and oils, crude oil, refined petroleum, natural gas, coal, which all constitute the largest share of its exports. And their chief trading partners are China, India, and Turkey. So the U.S. could impose, we've threatened 50% tariffs to India, probably because India's maybe weaker geopolitically than Turkey or China, but we've really almost used kid gloves with China. So I wonder if our current administration is committed enough, convicted enough. You used the word clarity. If we're clear enough in the goals of ending the war justly and peaceably, to really use economic power against China and Turkey.
Well, the meaning of this war for China is that the Chinese are watching very carefully. Some of the biggest exchange now of information and technology is happening between Ukraine and South Korea and Ukraine and Taiwan. If Russia is able to subdue Ukraine, you can bet that the next step will be that China launches attack at Taiwan. And I'm not an expert in the computers, but 90% of the most sophisticated chips are made in Taiwan, I think.
Yeah, in fact, we built our super collider in my experiment using TSMC, the Taiwan semiconductor company that's there in Taiwan. That's where all of our chips are made.
The strategic significance of Taiwanese computer industry for the global economy is you can't over exaggerate it, and that could be lost strategically if Ukraine loses. But if Ukraine succeeds in defending itself, maintaining a sovereignty, and developing with international cooperation and support a security system that is reliable, tyrants and bullies will have to, take that into consideration. And of course, what Taiwan and South Korea are learning from is the David and Goliath methodologies of warfare, asymmetric warfare. With Ilah's brother, who produces these drones, he says his company, they make the best drones, but they make only 10 a month. It's a small company, just a few people. He best robot on the ground drones in that specific category. I said, wow, technology, this war technology is changing from year to year. He says, no, it's changing from month to month. And you don't need necessarily a lot of hardware, a lot of big billions. Today, if the 200 big military units in Ukraine each got $5 million for their drones, which is $1 billion in total. These 200 battalions, it's a total game changer. Because out of those companies, this is the other thing that Ilah told me, or maybe it was Mr. Chmut, Taras Chmut, he said, these different teams working on drones are working at 40% capacity because they just don't have the money.
If I could just ask a question, dealing more about your analysis of truth and about sort of what are the big challenges that you see that Ukraine is fronting. You mentioned about democracy, certainly you mentioned about freedom, and the challenges that it's presenting to the world. You spoke very clearly about the witnesses of the martyrs that will carry forth. And if you could just expand on that a little bit and the challenges, I think that it even poses to us here in the United States.
So the question of life and death, when you face it, it puts many things in perspective and forces you to dig deeper and to face realities. One thing that I spoke about with Pope Francis was that NATO is not the cause. I mean, not too many bishops, I think, in history have kind of done that to the Pope and said, Holy Father, it's not true. The Pope didn't say, what Francis said, if you remember, he said, a president told me that it was NATO's kind of advance that provoked Russia. And I told him, 300 years ago there was no NATO and Russia was on its colonial quest independently of that. But many people in Ukraine dismissed Pope Francis. Pope Francis 400 times spoke in the defense of Ukraine, summoning the world to pray for the people of Ukraine, for the martyred people of Ukraine, for the tormented people of Ukraine. So many Ukrainians dismissed the Pope because on a few occasions, and I think they were less than 10, he said equivocal things. But 400 times he spoke in a way that South Africa, Chile, Peru, Egypt, the Southern Hemisphere heard about Ukraine. No other world leader so systematically, so regularly spoke in Ukraine's defense over the first 3 years of the war. And one of the embarrassing moments was when the Pope went off script. And that's most of the moments were when he did, spontaneously go off script. When he, after a speech, a talk conference to Russian Catholic young people online, he added that you should be proud of, your heritage, of Peter the Great and Catherine II. And, anybody that knows what the Pope talks about says about imperialism, would say, how can you speak about these creators of empire? Peter personally killed Ukrainian Catholic monks, personally, with a sword. He came into a monastery on the feast of St. Peter and Paul after, a plentiful banquet and much drink. He came into one of our churches and they began making fun of the monks. And one of them was killed right there. Another one on the next day was taken at sword's point to a hangman's noose, carrying both of his ears, which were chopped off, and he was hung. The brutality we see here has a tradition. No people has a monopoly on virtue or vice, but there is a tradition of sanctioned, state-sponsored Russian brutality and terrorism that has cost the lives of millions of people, including tens of millions of Russians. So, Pope Francis, made a mistake, and we had an hour and a half with him, 40-odd bishops, where we actually had almost 2 hours where he listened to what we had to say. And our present cardinal was very strong with him, the 45-year-old cardinal who just completed his visit to the U.S. But then I come to Odessa, and in Odessa until yesterday there was a statue of Catherine the Great, Catherine II. In Poltava, the statue of Peter was just removed a few months ago. So we Ukrainians have a lot to encounter about the truth, about historical truth, about the truth of colonialism and second-rate status. These are things that we need to confront, and the war is forcing us to confront it. The importance of language, the importance of history. President Zelensky has confronted this. 3 years ago, what difference does it make if our streets are named after Soviet genocidal tyrants? Just as long as the streets are paved well. This was Zelensky in 2019. We have a different president, and we have a different country, and we have a different society. And we're all in the process of growth. And, I'm hoping for my own conversion. Nobody's perfect. But there needs to be a lot of confronting. Germans are finally saying, Wandel durch Handel, change through business. We're going to change the Russians by doing business with them as we make a lot of money and allow them to build up their military with the money we give to them. The German economic boom of the last 25 years is built on cheap Russian fuel and cheap Chinese labor. Well, the truth is that the compromises you make sooner or later become a big cost. And you become strangled, you become dependent. President Reagan told the Germans in the 80s, don't get dependent on Soviet oil. Don't build those pipelines. Well into the Biden administration, the U.S. was sanctioning, allowing for an additional pipeline to be built. Today we're facing some of these economic truths, the geopolitical truths, but then there's also the anthropological truths and the truths of life and death. Is there something after death? I think most of these soldiers were willing to sacrifice their life because most of them were volunteers, because at some level, explicitly, implicitly, they had a deep faith that there's something more valuable than my life. My 30, 40, 50, 60 years, my 150 or 250 pounds. There's something that's bigger than me. And I'm willing to face death because I believe there's something on the other side of death. And I think that's also a message that Ukraine is sharing internally, but also to the outside world. Already during the Maidan in 2014, when I was stationed and serving in Paris, I could feel the French question, the question of the younger generations in France that just worried about, one of my staff persons was a French person, and she said, these Ukrainian people that come, they have a purpose, they have desire. These young people, they're ready to work, sacrifice, study, achieve. Our people are 30 years old and they don't know what to do in life. They want to go to the disco, stay out late, have mom cook, mom or grandmom do our laundry, No commitment to husband or wife, no commitment to a family. And those people are wondering and looking over at Ukraine across Europe and saying, and they're sacrificing their life for the European flag. They're risking their life on that Euromaidan for our flag. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. Somebody else has to pay for my freedom, for my democracy, for the freedom of press in my country, for the freedom of confession. And that is changing. People are realizing that these things are not free and that there is a cost. But that reckoning is still, I think, at an early stage.
Take some questions from the audience. This audio will be around with a microphone.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. My question is a very simple question. I was wondering whether Pope Leo has spoken out about Ukraine.
Pope Leo has, I think, made a special effort to come out on Ukraine immediately. So I was in Rome the day of his election. It was a Thursday. I can't remember the date. Was it May the 8th? And we were driving in a van with the head of our church, His Beatitude Sviatoslav, and members of the Permanent Synod, going to a barbecue at the Basilian General's Generalate. And there was news of the white smoke, and you could just see people pouring out into the streets and going to the square. We went to the house because you could see things better on TV than in the square. Along the way, His Beatitude gets a message from the nuncio in Kyiv. It says, we're preparing a proposal for the Pope for his first Sunday audience elocution. And we inserted or proposed 3 points. I don't know if I can now remember them. The third was mine, so I remember that it was ask for the release of the children. But it was a just and lasting, it was a just peace. To both of those points, the Holy See, and maybe it was Pope Leo, added not only the children, but the POWs, and not a just peace, but a lasting peace. And lasting peace, di duratura, which means security guarantees, basically in diplomatic language. So this was, the Pope hadn't emerged and we're already being asked, what to say. We offered what we thought should be said, and the Vatican amplified it, which was not the pattern in the past. Mm-hmm. Our church was not necessarily asked, and things were toned down. The first conversation with the head of state over the phone conversation Pope Leo had with President Zelensky. He was elected on Thursday. His first audience was on Sunday with the content that I explained. On Wednesday was his first public audience, his first Wednesday audience. It just so happened that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday were the Holy Year Jubilee days for the Eastern Catholic churches. So all the heads of the Eastern Catholic churches, many bishops, and some laity were in Rome. And the congregation, what do you call them now? Dicastery for Eastern churches convinced the Holy Father to dedicate that first audience to the Eastern Catholics. Now there's 600,000 Ukrainians in Italy, and the Pope Paul VI hall was just filled with Ukrainian Catholics, because the news was we bishops were told to tell priests, if you're Eastern Catholic, just come, you don't need tickets. They're going to let you in, because they couldn't organize it. So 80% of the people there were Ukrainian Catholics. And of course, all of us permanent synod bishops had a chance to meet the Pope there, and he spoke about Ukraine at his first general audience. And then the next Sunday, when it was his inauguration, I think the first head of state he met was President Zelensky. So that was immediate, clear. The other thing the Pope did is he offered the Holy See to be a mediator, which the Russians cynically rejected, saying, well, we're two Orthodox countries. We don't need, the Catholic Church to mediate. But that's why they always go to, some Muslim country for mediation. So, do with that. And repeatedly he's met with Ukrainian delegations of children, of widows, there's some encounter almost every week. Symbolic gestures and words of encouragement, and which Pope Francis did as well. But there was kind of an asterisk there with a few of the expressions or gestures.
Well, thank you. That's very good to hear.
Thank you very much for the speech and for the lecture that you've given. I'm going to try and keep the question short. We've heard since the war has gone on the idea of, rehearing the idea of the just war theory in this. Do you think it's time for a just peace theory to come forward? Because we've heard, like when some critics, some might say defeatists about this war say, well, if Ukraine just agrees to a peace and it gives the 4 provinces and Crimea to Russia, that would solve the issue and that would be over. But you think about it, and not only has Putin not shown that his word can be trusted, I just think of the words that Marshal Foch said after the Treaty of Versailles: this isn't peace but an armistice for 20 years. And the philosopher Fitch said after the Battle of Jena, a cowardly surrender won't save you from destruction, it'll only give you a short respite to a miserable existence. Do you think we need to sort of set up a guarantee and saying peace at any price is not a just thing?
Well, there's the global and civic conversation, and there's the Catholic conversation. And the community of the Ukrainian Catholic University for 3 years now has, in different ways, argued and put forth proposals to the Holy See that there needs to be a deep consideration in the Catholic Church, even a synod dedicated to the questions of war and peace. That has not yet happened, but there was an important conference held in April in Rome at that behest at the Gregorian University. The question of territory is often a simplistically phrased one. As you said, well, just give up this territory. But the question is, who can give up people? If I return to an American dystopic example, and if I said, some tyrant comes in and says, for our economy, it would be good to reintroduce slavery. And we're going to reintroduce it into 10 states. Make a choice. Which states are we going to? I'm forcing all of you to choose. Which states are you going to reintroduce slavery into? That's basically what that story or that kind of hypothesis is saying to Ukrainians. Oh, we'll just give up, these people. The fact notwithstanding that everywhere there is Russian occupation, you have mass graves, you have the abduction of children, their deportation to the depths of Russia and their brainwashing, that there is a total annihilation of Ukrainian language, history, cultural training in schools. Ukrainian Catholic Church is eliminated, and it has been every time under Russian occupation for the last 300 years. So this relinquishing territory is maybe some territorial concession will have to be made. I'm not saying that will not happen, but I'm saying, the Finlandization of Ukraine, where Finland stood up, and it's the only country that stood up to Russian aggression successfully. Poland didn't, Romania didn't. All those Eastern European countries ended up in the Soviet bloc. Finland remained neutral. It lost territory. It had its sovereignty limited. But there's one big difference between Finland and Ukraine. Stalin did not want to erase the Finnish nation. That was not an intention, an objective. Putin is let's say, very clear and systematic on insisting that Ukrainian nationhood and all characteristics of it will be extinguished where Russia arrives. Could you divide Ukraine like you divided Vietnam? Vietnam was divided by a peace accord. But U.S. boots on the ground left, and in 2 years it was over. In Korea, there was a division, but the sovereignty of Southern Korea was ensured by by American forces and by American economic help, which has led to a flourishing economy, as happened where Americans instituted the Marshall Plan in devastated Europe and particularly in devastated Germany. The last example to look at is probably Israel, a country that battled for its existence, a country that was surrounded by enemies, and a country that developed its legitimacy. Because one of the preconditions for Ukrainian sovereignty is that in the heads of people, the idea of Ukrainian sovereignty as a natural thing is accepted, not only by Russians, but also by Americans. Because President Trump thought that Crimea was Russian. We have certain models, but Israel has been able to do this largely, or at least with the contribution of the United States. Would it have succeeded without? We don't know what would have happened. What if historians can't respond to? But Ukraine will not be able to hold its land. It will not be able to do what President Trump said it can do in that tweet without international cooperation. But if it does, the benefits for the free world, for the European Union, for the United States will be very important.
Thank you very much.
One last question.
Thank you very much. I will be brief. Couldn't agree more with your evaluation of Russia's tradition of brutality, and also it's so countercultural to the liberal West, to the democratic countries, to view this paradigm as not a dialogue or some sort of win-win, but a paradigm in which Russia operates for centuries, which is lose-lose or zero-sum, but win-win is never considered a sustainable, acceptable solution for them. So my question is, based on your conversations with U.S. leadership, with Ukrainian leadership, with Western politicians, do you see any progress in understanding this, and this understanding being translated into practical steps towards Russia, that it actually has to face strong pushback? Thank you.
I do. It's painfully slow, and it comes at the cost of Ukrainian lives. But what I was saying about the German realization is a quote from a German government official speaking at this conference in Kiev, 2 weeks ago. Germans are beginning to realize it. I think there's some change in President Trump's understanding of things. Poles understand, and what happened 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago with the incursion of drones into Poland or into Romania, or the planes flying over Estonia are confirming concerns and pushing for greater action. Saying, President Trump saying, responding to a question, if NATO planes come in aggressively over NATO territory, should they be shot down? He said yes. That's Russian planes, right? Or what did I say? NATO planes, sorry, over NATO, yeah. So there is a change in mentality, but getting to win-win is a long way. Win-win is a gospel. Win-win is Eden, God giving and asking Adam to live the gift. Putin is grabbing. Much of business is grabbing. Elon Musk, is not proposing win-win. And our cultural, political, economic icons, sometimes we in the church, we've got a way to go to reach the gospel. But it is the truth. And that is where people flourish, when we do live win-win. Russia is 28 times as big as Ukraine. There's 11 time zones. Just live there. Develop that land. Use those resources. Your 700 universities. Develop technologies. Why do you have to sacrifice 1 million of your own people to get 1% of Ukrainian land? It's an obsession. It's pathological. And unfortunately, it's not only Putin. These problems exist in Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn did not recognize Ukrainian, let's say, aspirations for nationhood. Your colleague and teacher, Father Alexander Schmemann, did not look disdainfully at Ukrainian concerns. A great Orthodox theologian. His son is Pulitzer Prize winning editor for the New York Times. We've participated during this war in discussions with him. Alexei Navalny, the martyr, who was killed by Putin, supported the annexation of Crimea. There's a lot of road to the truth. And the truth is in one person. It's in Christ. It's in the truths of our scriptures. It's in the truths of the creation, the gift to Adam and Eve. And the sad story is that we human beings, in our sinfulness, with this beautiful world, are capable of destroying so much and destroying each other as well. The hope is that with God's grace, we can see the truth, see the dignity of others, defend that dignity, and exit out of this vicious cycle of sin and death.
Thank you so very much. And let us give a strong round of applause for his grace.